On July 16, 1054, three men walked into the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in the Christian world, during afternoon prayer. They did not come to worship. They came from Rome, sent by the Pope, and they walked directly to the high altar in front of a stunned congregation. They placed a single document on the altar. Then they turned, walked out, and shook the dust from their feet in the street outside. A deliberate biblical gesture meaning, we want nothing more to do with this place. The document was a formal excommunication of the Patriarch of Constantinople, the spiritual leader of Eastern Christianity, and everyone who supported him. 3 days later, the Patriarch responded. He excommunicated the men who had left the document and everyone associated with them. Neither side believed they were ending anything permanent. But the two halves of the Christian church, drifting apart for centuries, had just crossed a line they would not cross back for 1,000 years. This is 1054, the year one letter split Christianity in half. By the end of this video, you will understand how the largest religion in human history split into two churches that still to this day have never fully reunited. You will learn why this split was not really about theology, even though it was framed that way, and what it was actually about. You will learn about the single Latin word that Eastern and Western Christians could not agree on. You will learn what happened in the Hagia Sophia that July afternoon, and why both sides walked away, believing they had won. And you will understand why, 900 years later, in 1965, two church leaders tried to undo what happened in 1054, and why, even after that, the split remains. 1054, the year the church became two churches, and has stayed two ever since. The split it represents did not begin in 1054. Christianity in the 11th century exists within two great spheres that trace back to the division of the Roman Empire itself. In the West, the old Western Roman Empire has long since collapsed, replaced by Germanic kingdoms, with the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, serving as the unifying religious authority across a fragmented political landscape. In the East, the Roman Empire never fell. The Byzantine Empire has continued in unbroken succession from antiquity, with its capital at Constantinople and its own patriarch serving as the senior religious authority. For centuries, these two halves of Christianity share the same core faith while developing along increasingly divergent paths. Different primary languages, Latin in the West, Greek in the East. Different customs regarding clergy and worship. Different relationships with political power. And they disagree with growing intensity about a single theological question that becomes the flashpoint of 1054. The dispute is known as the Filioque Controversy, named for a Latin word meaning "and the Son." The original Nicene Creed, formulated in the 4th century, states that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Both churches originally shared this version. Beginning in the 6th century, churches in Spain and later elsewhere in Western Europe added a phrase, that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, Filioque. The addition reflects genuine theological development in the West, but it is made unilaterally, without agreement from the East, and without the kind of universal council that produced the original creed. The clause spreads through Western practice and is eventually adopted in Rome itself in the early 11th century. To Eastern theologians, this is not a minor adjustment. It appears to alter a fundamental shared statement of faith without the consent of the entire church. The theological content itself raises questions the East finds troubling about the relationship between the persons of the Trinity. The dispute simmers for centuries without producing a formal break. It is one grievance among several, significant but not by itself sufficient to split the church. Beyond theology, the relationship between Rome and Constantinople has been deteriorating for generations. The churches have developed different practices that create ongoing friction, The Western Church requires celibacy for priests. The Eastern Church permits married clergy. The Western Church uses unleavened bread in worship. The Eastern Church uses leavened bread. These differences seem minor in isolation, but in a climate of growing suspicion, each becomes evidence of the other side's departure from proper practice. Politically, the Pope claims a form of primacy over the entire Christian Church, rooted in the tradition that the Apostle Peter founded the Church in Rome. The Patriarch of Constantinople recognizes a form of honor for Rome, but rejects the idea that the Pope holds direct governing authority over the Eastern churches. In 1054, this tension is sharpened by a dispute over churches in southern Italy, where significant Greek Christian populations face pressure from Norman conquerors favoring Latin practices. Patriarch Michael Cerularius responds by closing Latin Rite churches in Constantinople, a direct escalation. Into this environment, Pope Leo IX dispatches a delegation led by Cardinal Humbert of Silva, Canada, a man known for uncompromising views on Roman primacy and hostility toward what he considers Eastern deviations. Two men, each convinced they represent the true and legitimate Christian Church, are about to meet. Cardinal Humbert arrives in Constantinople in early 1054, officially tasked with resolving disputes and securing Byzantine military cooperation against the Normans in southern Italy. The mission does not go well. Humbert is, by most historical accounts, a poor choice for diplomatic sensitivity, a committed reformer deeply invested in asserting papal authority, temperamentally inclined toward confrontation. Patriarch Cerularius is equally unwilling to compromise. He receives the delegation with what they consider insufficient respect for papal authority. Negotiations deteriorate over the following months. Humbert grows convinced Cerularius is actively undermining Roman authority. Cerularius grows convinced the delegation has come to assert dominance rather than negotiate. Compounding the crisis, Pope Leo IX dies in April 1054, before the confrontation reaches its climax, meaning Humbert will soon act representing a pope who is no longer alive, a detail that later calls into question the legal validity of what he is about to do. But Humbert proceeds as though he still speaks with the full weight of papal power. On July 16, 1054, Cardinal Humbert and two companions enter the Hagia Sophia during the Saturday afternoon service, the church full of worshippers. They walk to the high altar and place a written document there, a bull of excommunication, condemning Patriarch Michael Cerularius and his supporters, accusing them of heresies and improper practices, declaring them cut off from the church. They turn and walk out. As they leave, drawing on the biblical instruction given by Jesus regarding towns that reject his disciples, they shake the dust from their feet. The reaction in Constantinople is immediate. Cerularius, furious, attempts to have the document burned, though copies survive. 3 days later, Cerularius convenes a synod. It issues its own excommunication, condemning Humbert and his companions. 2 documents, 2 excommunications, 2 men who each believe they have defended true Christianity against a corrupted rival. At the time, neither document is understood, even by its authors, as splitting the entire Christian church. The excommunications are, in the strict legal sense, directed at specific individuals, not at the Eastern or Western churches as institutions. But that is not how it will be remembered. Here is what makes 1054 significant, and it is not simply the exchange of documents. In the years following 1054, there is no immediate sense, east or west, that a permanent schism has occurred. Church leaders continue to communicate. There are attempts at reconciliation. The idea that this event represents the definitive split develops gradually in retrospect as later events reinforce, rather than heal the division. The event that truly hardens the split is 1204, a date you know if you have watched our earlier video on that number. Soldiers of the Fourth Crusade, ostensibly bound for the Holy Land, instead sacked Constantinople itself, looting its churches and installing a Western ruler on the Byzantine throne. This act by Western Christians against the Eastern Christian capital does more to entrench mutual hostility than the theological disputes of 1054 ever could. After 1204, reconciliation becomes far more difficult, not because the original disagreements have grown larger, but because an entire population now has direct memory of Western soldiers destroying an Eastern Christian city. The wound of 1,204 layers onto the wound of 1,054, and the combination proves far more durable than either alone. By the time later councils attempt genuine reunion, the distance between the two churches has become entrenched in the daily identity of millions. Agreements signed by leaders fail because the populations they represent do not accept them. In 1965, 911 years after Humbert placed his document on the altar, Pope Paul VI and Ecumenical Patriarch Athenagoras I take an extraordinary step. Meeting during the Second Vatican Council, they issue a joint declaration formally lifting the mutual excommunications of 1054. This is genuinely significant, an acknowledgement 9 centuries later that the excommunications had been driven substantially by personal conflict and political circumstance rather than irreconcilable necessity. Both leaders express regret. But lifting the excommunications does not reunite the churches. The Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church remain formally separate today. The Filioque question remains unresolved. The question of papal authority remains a fundamental disagreement. Centuries of separate development have produced 2 distinct traditions, each with its own saints, liturgy, and historical identity. The 2 churches that emerged from that July afternoon remain, to this day, 2 churches. Here is what 1054 actually represents. It is tempting to understand it as the moment Christianity split, a single dramatic event with a clear before and after. That is not precisely what happened. The forces producing the Great Schism had been building for centuries before Humbert entered the Hagia Sophia, and the schism would not fully harden into permanent reality until 1204 layered an additional wound onto the original one. What 1054 represents is something more human. The moment accumulated theological difference, cultural divergence, and political rivalry finally produced a dramatic, symbolic act that could not be easily walked back. 2 men, each convinced of their own righteousness, produced a confrontation that neither likely understood would define Christian history for 1,000 years. This is the pattern across many of the pivotal moments this channel has explored. The dramatic, memorable event, the crossed river, the assassinated leader, the burned library, the excommunication on an altar, is rarely the true cause of what follows. It is the visible symptom of deeper, slower forces that had already made rupture likely. Cardinal Humbert did not split Christianity by placing a document on an altar. He gave a name and a date to a division already growing for centuries, ensuring that future generations would have a single dramatic moment to point to, even though the truth is more complicated. 1054. The year one letter split Christianity in half, and the split has never fully healed, even 900 years after the excommunications were formally lifted. 2 churches, 2 traditions, both tracing their lineage to the same origin, both still separated by a schism that began with 2 men who each believed they were saving Christianity from the other. If this story made you think, leave a comment. Was the split inevitable, given how far east and west had already drifted? Or could 2 more patient men have prevented that July afternoon? Subscribe to the Vault of Numbers every week, one number, one story history forgot to tell you. The next number in the vault? In 1204, soldiers marching under the same cross that united Christendom turned their weapons on a Christian city instead. The wound from that day never fully closed. The vault remains open.